Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Hybrid Healing Hour. Today, we are going to be addressing mindfulness and meditation. We have two very special guests with us today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first one, which is Pablo del Real. He is a co-executive director of Soil and Soul. Is a nonprofit agency that teaches mindfulness and eco healing. He is the co-founder of mindfulness clubs and wellness circles, which are programs that use group mindfulness and nature for holistic well-being. Pablo is also a director of education for The Way Mindfulness Education, which is a company that provides mental health training and coaching.
And we also have Kiara Moraes. And as you can tell by the last name, Kiara is my daughter. Kiara and I talk quite a bit about mindfulness, but I don't know that much about mindfulness. So she's going to help explain it, she and Pablo today. But I know that she's been a follower and she's been working with Pablo for quite a while now. And I've heard Pablo's name mentioned many times, but today's the first time I'm actually meeting him in person. And it's a real pleasure. So with that, why don't we start talking? You know, Gandhi said the future depends on what you do today. And being present in the now is, I think, the tenet of mindfulness, right? So Pablo, why don't you, how did you get into mindfulness?
Well, thanks for having us here today on this Hybrid Healing Hour. I got into mindfulness through a need that I had to manage my thoughts and emotions rather than having my emotions and thoughts manage me. And without knowing about mindfulness skill, I kind of stumbled into it and found that it was the skill that I had been missing in terms of management of thoughts, self-regulation, emotional regulation. So that was in 2005, so almost 20 years ago now.
Wow. And Kiki?
Yeah, so when I entered high school, I was in a very dark place mentally, struggling with the major depressive disorder. I felt pretty lost, and I projected my negative emotion or my difficult emotions onto others. I was introduced to mindfulness my freshman year of high school, and I discovered how much it could benefit me, especially when I'm practicing with a group. So I wanted to start a mindfulness club at my high school, which I did with the help of Pablo, so I could practice with others on a regular basis. And I remember sometimes I would show up to club not wanting to have come because of my depression, and it was telling me, like, this isn't going to be useful, it's going to be, whatever. But after practicing with everyone, 9 out of 10 times I went to club, I would feel so much better.
That's so inspiring because there's so many people out there right now struggling with depression. I love how you put it as well, Pablo, that you are trying to control your thoughts instead of letting them control you. So I think, why don't you go ahead and tell us, you said group, right? So you specialize in group mindfulness. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's kind of a myth out there in the mainstream media, we'll say, about the lone meditator, the person on the top of the mountain by herself, or the person at the beach by himself, meditating and reaching some pinnacle state of mind. In history and in our experience, group mindfulness is much more effective. Traditionally speaking, mindfulness has been taught in a group setting. At the very minimum, teacher and student kind of dynamic versus learning from an app, let's say, or from reading a book. And so the dynamic of the group mindfulness is kind of like in the natural world. A plant living by itself is a little bit more at risk because of climate, because of all kinds of threats, versus a group of plants are much more stable and less vulnerable to any kinds of threats. So in the mindfulness world, we talk about 3 roots that can help us for well-being now and in the future. And those 3 roots are a teacher, teachings, and a group. So without the group, I can do mindfulness at home, and that has its benefits. But without the group, I'm really missing out on a key benefit, which is that protective factor of having other people involved in the exercise.
It's like an entourage, right? It's always nice to have a support group and community.
Mm-hmm. And if I can just add to that, it helps you stay accountable. Like, you want to show up and be there for other people. It helps you cultivate a sense of empathy, and it helps you gain a deeper appreciation for those around you and everything around you. So I think the group is a really crucial element when practicing mindfulness.
Would you say there's some accountability to that as well? Because
Definitely.
like you said, I mean, you don't want to, I feel like you would let other people down, and so that kind of helps motivate you to go, even when you don't feel like it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Very nice.
So how does the mind affect physical health?
Well, I'd like to engage you all in a little pop quiz here, if that's okay. So as a teacher, I like to bring these on occasion to people who are interested in learning about mindfulness. And this will relate to the question that you just asked about the mind-body connection. So question number 1 in the quiz is, how many thoughts does the average adult have in a given day? How many thoughts, roughly speaking?
I feel like it'd be thousands.
Yeah, I would say thousands.
Yeah, exactly. So the science is saying anywhere between 6,000 and 60,000 thoughts, depending on how you define a thought. So good. Question number 1. And it's just a 3-question quiz. Number 2, what percentage of our thoughts on any given day are negative?
I'd say 30%.
Yeah, I'd say closer to 50%.
You're getting warmer. So the science is saying around 80% of our thoughts are negative.
Wow.
And there are reasons for that, evolutionary biology and things like that, trying to stay safe. But 80%, even if we're trying to get a 50-50 balance, if we're at 80%, we're well out of whack.
Well, I'd say if I'm driving, it's probably 80%,
100%,
especially
right?
here in South Florida.
Yeah, exactly. Last question is, what percentage of our thoughts every day are repetitive? So same thought maybe, but different details.
I'd go with 50% there.
I'd go with 70%.
Yeah, we're getting warmer. So the science is saying around 85%.
Wow.
Same thought, different details, different day, but same thought pattern. So add that up, and what do we get? We get what's called negativity bias. So this is the way the mind works. We could have 50,000 negative thoughts today, and they could be kind of the same thought over and over. So how does that affect the body? Well, so many ways, right? To think is to create some kind of brain chemistry. And if we go into the clinical world, we know about the placebo effect, for example. Right. Maybe you can just touch on the placebo effect and how that works or how it doesn't work.
Yeah, well, if you believe something is going to work, there's a chance that you'll feel that it's working for you.
Right. So the converse is true, right? If we're constantly thinking about negative thoughts, those things may become true or truer in some ways. Mm-hmm. So if we don't intervene into that thought stream, we can have this negativity bias kind of soup in our consciousness. And that can affect our body in many different ways. Stress manifests in all kinds of ways. As physicians, you all know this, and you can speak much more to that than we can. I'd like to hear how maybe stress manifests in the body, depression, because these are integrated illnesses, right? And require some kind of special treatment.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of times when people are stressed, depressed, or anxious, they start to have more pain, right? There's chronic pain, and
we see it even with lab values. People who are under a lot of stress, their testosterone levels are low. Their other hormones are low. They gain weight. There's so many manifestations that we see related to stress.
Sleep issues, definitely. Headaches is a big one. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lot of inflammation. So those are things we physically see in practice. So, but if you have somebody who's a very healthy individual and they think they're healthy, they're well, why would they benefit from mindfulness?
Well, I think the body is a miracle, but it has its weaknesses. And those weaknesses will manifest in illness over time, aging, and we can slow those things down or prevent them sometimes, aging and illness, but not entirely. So I know that people who suffer chronic illness, for example, which is the opposite of what you're saying, right? But to go to the other extreme, right? Somebody who's always sick can use the mindfulness skill to have some freedom from the chronic pain. And so when somebody's well and healthy and then maybe suddenly hurts themselves after a long period of wellness, if they have this skill of mindfulness, I do want to get to the definition as well. But if somebody who's well suddenly finds himself not well, either emotionally or mentally or physically, that's a skill that they can use then to cultivate that inner wellness that can help heal the outer wellness as well.
So the way I like to look at it is also like practicing your wellness, right? So even if you have I always use this example in the office, a Major League Baseball player, right? They don't just make it to the major leagues and say, oh, I'm good. They keep practicing. So even though you're healthy and well, mindfulness and meditation can keep you well. And it's more of a practice, like you said, if something were to happen, then you know how to handle it better. And I mean, I don't care how healthy and happy I might be, but driving in South Florida, if you practice mindfulness and it reduces your stress level, like you said, it's not worth getting your blood pressure up and things like that. So I think everybody can benefit from mindfulness.
And, as physicians and parents, we really don't know everything that's going on with someone. So I know, Kiara, you don't mind talking about yourself and everything you've been through. But Kiara, first of all, always a happy-go-lucky kid. It's hard to tell that she suffered from depression and anxiety and everything else she was going through. She graduated University of Florida, Phi Beta Kappa, graduated with honors. She's studying to be a doctor. She's going to study for her MCAT and then apply to medical school. So you would think by all outward appearances, Kiara's perfect, right? There's nothing going on with her. But so how did you find out that you needed mindfulness or that you needed more in your life to help you through some of these struggles?
I just knew that I wasn't as happy as I could be. And not even just happiness, because happiness is a temporary feeling, but I knew I wanted to be able to accept the way I feel and be fully immersed in what I'm feeling without letting it bring me down necessarily. Like just experience human emotions and be okay with that no matter what. So yeah, I've definitely experienced my fair share of struggles with mental illness, like depression, social anxiety, panic disorder. But this is where mindfulness has come into play for me because it's provided me with the tools to better deal with and navigate many of my symptoms. And I'm also a flow artist. So like I love to dance with my hula hoops and, any of that stuff.
And now fire.
And fire, yay. Yes. But I'd say this is definitely a form of mindfulness and meditation for me. It immerses me in the present moment. I'm solely focused on what I'm doing, and it gives me freedom from what I'm feeling, and it's really, really helpful.
So on top of that, let's get to that definition. Tell us, what is mindfulness? I think everyone's waiting to hear.
Yeah. Let's start with the clinical definition, one of the clinical definitions. And this comes from Amishi Jha. She's a researcher down at the University of Miami. She's working a lot with Department of Defense, training soldiers to develop the skill of mindfulness. And Amishi Jha says that mindfulness is a mental mode characterized by attention to the present, free from emotional reactivity and conceptual elaboration. So that's the freedom that Kiara just talked about. Because if we can break that bind of emotional reactivity that we often have and exhibit, well, that's an incredible freedom right there to not be reactive in let's say, an ongoing relationship. But the other element of freedom is from the conceptual elaboration. What's that? Well, the mind can add a lot of things to the present that are not really here. And so when we get those dual freedoms, well, what else do we need? We can actually be present, even if I've sprained my ankle and I've got some soreness. Well, that's healing in the moment, and there's nothing else I can do, maybe besides the ice that's on it, for example. And so, as Kiara said, that's my experience as well. The freedom is available right here, right now, if I can generate that energy of mindfulness.
Wow. And is there evidence-based treatment for this?
Yeah, so John Kabat-Zinn, to name another clinician, founded the mindfulness-based stress reduction program over 40 years ago at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. And so since then, since 1979, I believe it was, there have been numerous studies, and even before then, there were some studies around TM, transcendental meditation, but MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, really took it a little bit more mainstream because that was in a clinical setting. And so it's been tested, mindfulness and meditation, those are slightly different. And to come to the distinction there, so mindfulness, the shorthand version of mindfulness that we use in our mindfulness clubs, is that it's simply the supervision of attention. It's paying attention to paying attention. So kind of a meta attention, right? Whereas meditation, we say, is the concentration of attention, keeping our attention in one place over and over. So in kind of an everyday way to think of it is meditation is often with eyes closed and mindfulness is often with eyes open. So mindfulness is a kind of a bridge to the meditation or to the contemplative mind. And to come back to that definition, mindfulness is a mental mode. So it's a way the mind works, but it's not that common in our culture. So to find others who are interested in cultivating that skill of mindfulness is really the first step, because it's very difficult to maintain on one's own.
Mm-hmm. And if I can add a little bit more to that, I think it's important to note that mindfulness can be mindfulness of anything. It can be mindfulness of eating, loving, driving, walking, whatever. It's just being fully aware of the present moment and what you're currently doing as a way to unify your mind and body in that moment. Because, your body's always in the present moment. Your mind, on the other hand, can be past, present, future, whichever, but you want to unite them in the present moment. So meditation is one way to practice mindfulness. It's concentrating your attention on your breath or on mantras or even counting, like whichever you choose, but they are separate, but also linked.
And to come back to the evidence-based, there have been a lot of studies, and I'm not a clinician, but I do pay attention to some of the studies. Depression is one area where there's been some very recent research around the effectiveness of regular mindfulness exercise. A minimum like 12 minutes a day over 6 to 8 week period can be as effective as the latest antidepressant. I don't know all the drug names. Another one is blood pressure. Mindfulness can be shown to help regulate blood pressure. But it does come with the practice. It needs to be regular and consistent.
Absolutely. Can somebody do mindfulness anywhere or anytime, or is there a set time limit that you recommend that they have to do it for at least 10 minutes, or can it be just 5 minutes? What do you recommend?
Well, personally, I recommend about 20 minutes a day, even if that's 2 segments of 10 minutes, maybe first thing in the morning or last thing at night or middle of the day. But we could do a little mindfulness exercise here for 3 minutes or 5 minutes. Yeah,
I think we should definitely do that at the end.
Yep.
We should. We'll save some time for that. Mm-hmm. Awesome.
So for someone who's brand new to mindfulness, do you recommend going right to a group, or do you recommend trying to learn a little bit on your own first? Maybe use an app. What do you recommend for the newbie who's never done it before?
For the newbie, I would say a little bit of both. Find a group, find a teacher at least, somebody with some experience. And that's also kind of going back to the very first question, what got me into mindfulness. Once I realized that there was this innate ability that we have to regulate our thoughts and emotions, I recognized that was something that I needed a long time ago in high school. And so, seeing young adults suffer or struggle with some of these same issues, and maybe not get as much benefit out of, let's say, therapy, and therapy is wonderful. I'm not saying to not do that, but it was just maybe lacking an element of that social group dynamic, and also didn't always include the skill to develop that skill of training our attention in a particular way. So I would start with, somebody who's got some experience, whether that's a therapist. Often many therapists do integrate mindfulness into their practice these days as part of DBT, CBT. Maybe Kiara can talk a little bit more about those. And then, some resources and books. I learned a lot from reading in the early years, including one of my favorite teachers, Thich Nhat Hanh, great mindfulness teacher for over 50 years. And I was blessed to spend a week on retreat with him in 2009, a 5-day mindfulness retreat in upstate New York. So
wow, that's awesome.
There are, that's another way to get involved, is just to go somewhere and practice for a day or 2 or 5.
For many people, mindfulness is a relatively new term, but it's been around for a while, right? Do you know how long mindfulness has been around as a practice or an art?
I like to think that mindfulness has been around as long as humans have been humans. Our species has a particular name, right? Homo sapiens sapiens. It's almost like wisdom of wisdom. So it's that coming back to that metacognition sort of, but even beyond that. So I think as soon as humans realized that they were humans, there's been mindfulness, this ability to be still and present in the mind, although we might be active in the body, but the stillness and presence of attention, I think, has been available as long as we've been humans.
So why do you think it's such a big thing now? I've heard so much more about mindfulness lately.
Well, I can speak to that very briefly or at length. But, mental health among teens has been in crisis, at least since 2012. And that's not a coincidence, that at the same time, everybody in this country, at least, started carrying one of these in their pockets. And that same year, most teens were on some kind of social media platform. Also with adults, the Surgeon General just this year called attention to the loneliness epidemic. And there's also, I think for the first time, some kind of advisory for physicians to screen for anxiety in all adults. So these are not coincidences that suddenly we're carrying, this really incredible, powerful device in our pockets, and mental health is declining. So why is it having a moment now? I like to say that, mindfulness has been trending for the last 2,000 years, but just in small pockets. But it is becoming a little bit more prevalent in the mainstream, I think, because it's been decoupled from spiritual communities where it traditionally was taught.
And I think a lot of it is also, since COVID, people are really trying to get back to their normal state of mental health still, I think, to this day. And that isolation has a lot to do with it. But also, we're really big into biohacking, and everyone's just trying to fix everything right now, right? So mindfulness is definitely a big tool, I would say. And I love that you guys have touched on that. And I know, like meditation, I like to kind of go back. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I know I like to think of meditation as a practice, right? It's a different, and mindfulness is a tool. Like they're separate, but you can also do them together, right? Or no? What do you recommend there?
I mean, you can, mindfulness of meditation is a thing. Okay. So, yes, they can be joined together. I would say when you're meditating, it is practicing mindfulness in many cases, because you are supervising your attention. You're paying attention to paying attention. Mm-hmm. And,
Because even if you're meditating for a certain purpose, or for peace or love, focus, attention, whatever, you're still bringing that focus and, like you said, bringing that attention to attention.
Exactly.
Gotcha. And even if you are doing a what do you call it? A chant? Mantra. Sorry. I was blanking on that word. Even if you are doing a mantra, or if you listen to music, right? There's certain chimes or music that you might listen to that can still help some people focus. Some people like silence. It doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. Great.
So why don't we go back to that exercise that you were talking about?
Well, I still have a few more questions. So what about do you have any apps that could help people? Did you guys start with anything, you particularly, Kiki?
I used Headspace for a little bit, but honestly, nothing compared to the power of meditating with a group or practicing mindfulness with a group. Headspace was helpful in a way, to an extent. It has short little guided meditations. I think that's helpful for beginners, in my opinion. But yeah, like I said, nothing compares to being in person with a group.
Yeah, I think that would definitely help guide people and help take away some of the fear of doing it on your own. I think people are like, well, I don't know how to start. Well, I think being in a group would definitely help. But I know I also we wear the Aura Ring, and the Aura Ring also has a ton of mindfulness on it and breathing techniques to help you get good rest. And you can do that at any time. There's also the calm.com app. I usually recommend that. And then there's also the Insight Timer. That's a big one that a lot of people have in some of our patients.
That's one I've been using a lot lately too.
Yeah. And Plum Village is a community that Thich Nhat Hanh co-founded, and they have an app out there too, Plum Village. And I think, did you mention the Calm app?
Calm, yeah. Calm.
I think some pro athletes are kind of pitching Calm. Mindfulness has had an outsized role in the pro sports world in the last 20 years or so, especially in the NBA. So in terms of evidence-based, Phil Jackson, the coach of the Chicago Bulls, brought in a special mindfulness coach for the teams that he was coaching, the Michael Jordan teams, because those guys were so talented. But Phil Jackson likes to say, a lot of athletes think that the trick to greatness is just more and more work. And he said, no, there's actually a lot of value in non-action, in non-doing.
I love that.
Yeah, because you can only push the body so far. And then where is the room for improvement? It's in the mind, it's in the emotions.
So I have been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, and I share that even with some of my patients. So I started doing mindfulness and incorporating mindfulness. I started actually a long time ago, probably 10 years ago. And that has really helped me get through. And I would stop and do it if I caught myself being too hyperactive or too overwhelmed and I, starting multiple projects and not, finishing any of it, I would go ahead and take a 10-minute timeout. I would just put on the Calm app and go lay down, slow it down and relax. And sometimes if I was overwhelmed, I actually would just fall asleep. And then I'd wake up feeling wonderful. And, people always think about, I don't have time for that. There's not enough time in the day. You actually, the one thing I think I would recommend is you get that time back in productivity. When you're running around and you're not doing anything and getting anything done on time, if you take that 10-minute time out or whatever you wish or can do at that time, you'll get that back in your productivity. And I found that so helpful. And then I just incorporated meditation more recently, and that has also helped with my road rage. I actually, if someone cuts me off, I'm so much more peaceful. I'm like, it's not worth it. They're having a problem today. I'm actually a lot more accepting. And I think that is really good practice for everybody.
Yeah, not only do you get it back in productivity, but I think we get the time invested back in effectiveness. Because just in terms of activity versus accomplishment, right? We want to accomplish things in our careers, in our fields, in our personal lives. And so kind of back to the point about mindfulness, meditation, where are we going with this? In general, when we settle down from an active exercise, whether it's walking or running, whatever it is, and we there's a progression from mindfulness to concentration that comes through meditation. And from there, the fruit is insight or wisdom. When I sit for those 5 minutes or 10 minutes, maybe during lunch, I allow my consciousness to kind of show me what I really need to focus on next. And so if I'm a student, freaking out about a test coming up, well, maybe I didn't eat enough this morning. And so in that moment of stillness, I can say, I'm a little bit hungry, actually. I should probably eat something before this test. So that insight is what we get also, and that can help us stay on the path of wisdom and effectiveness versus just straight productivity and activity.
So why don't we do that 3-minute activity now?
Sure. So I invite you to find a posture that's comfortable yet alert. Can keep our eyes open or closed as we prefer. And I invite us to bring some attention to our feet, noticing the connection between the body and the earth. And from here, I invite us to bring some attention to our breath. And I'll offer some short cues along the way as we go. Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. In, out. 2 key words we can use to link mind, body, here, now. In, with the in-breath. Out, with the out-breath. And if our attention wanders, we can notice it's wandering and just call it back. That's developing the skill. In, out. Breathing in, I notice the in-breath becomes deeper. Breathing out, the out-breath is slower. Deep, slow. 2 new keywords, linking body-mind. Here now. Deep, slow. And the attention will wander away from the in-breath or the out-breath, and so we just call it back without judgment, with acceptance, deep, slow. Letting go of that exercise, we can bring some attention to our hands, noticing the connection between body and furniture, clothing, the air around us, the air in us. We can open the eyes if they were closed. We can resume our conversation, perhaps with a little more energy of mindfulness. And yeah.
That was wonderful.
Yeah.
I already noticed my heart rate was lowering as we were doing all the breathing. And that was only 3 minutes. Imagine what that could do for your blood pressure and for your stress level.
I wish we started with that.
I know.
I've been anxious this whole time. That just brought me right down.
Yeah. See, we should have. You're right.
Yeah.
All right. For the next one then, right?
Well, I do want to bring some attention to a difference between mindfulness and breath work, is sometimes called, or breathing exercises. So in my experience, or in my sort of lexicon, I usually distinguish breath work as something that is altering the breath. You can do box breathing, breathe in for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, breathe out for a count of 4, etc. That's altering the breath, and that's not necessarily mindfulness. Mindfulness is observing the breath, awareness of breath, without altering it. We can, if we want to, just to kind of catch our attention on the breath for a quick, short in-breath or a long out-breath, but it is different. It's not altering the breath, it's observing it. In that particular instance, we can, as Kiara said, we can have mindfulness of food, mindfulness of walking, but it's more observing versus altering.
I agree. Actually, whenever I've done the breath work, I struggle with that one a little bit. All I can think about is like, I'm going to make it. Am I going to make it? Like it actually makes me a little, I don't know. Everybody has to find their own thing, right? Like breath work doesn't work for me, but the mindfulness and meditation is my go-to. And I think that just goes to tell everybody how it's all dependent on you, and you have to try these things. And I love how you were bringing us back, because you're right. I mean, your mind is going to drift. It's okay. Just bring it back and accept that it's going to do that. I think that's a very key role in people trying this. And not to judge themselves or get down on themselves or give up and say, I can't do this. And I know I started out with small mindfulness things at first, 3 minutes. And then maybe I did that twice a day. And then I would work my way up to 5 minutes and then 10 minutes. And as you practice, just like anything else, right, to get better at it. Wonderful.
So Pablo, if people want to get a hold of you, or if they want to join your mindfulness club, how do they do that?
Well, we have right now, thanks to Kiara and another colleague, Dante Brown, we have a Sunday Mindfulness Club. That's on Sundays in Lake Worth Beach for our South Florida friends. That's Sunday, 10:30 a.m. And you can find the address at soilandsoul.org. That's soil like the dirt, and soul like the food.org.
Okay. And Kiara, if people want to follow your flow art video, how can they do that? Where are you?
I'm on Instagram at Kiara Flows, Kiara Flows.
And your videos are pretty awesome.
Thank you.
Yes. Love it. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. The information contained in this podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended for the purposes of diagnosing, curing, treating, or preventing any disease. This podcast is provided on the understanding that it does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. Before using any products or services referenced on this podcast, consult with your healthcare provider, carefully read all labels, and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the products. Information found or received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem, or should you have any healthcare questions, please promptly call or see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Dr. Brian Moraes, Deanna Weilbacher, and Hybrid Medical Solution, do not claim responsibility for any adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for any statements made by the guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referenced.
If you would like to submit any questions or if you have any topics you would be interested in hearing about on future episodes, please contact us through our website, www.hybridmedicalsolution.com. That is solution with no S at the end. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, all under Hybrid Medical Solution.